Welcome to Legal Beagle.
Hey everybody, welcome to an all-new episode of Legal Beagle with Kristina Lyke. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Kristina is the founder of Lyke Law PLLC, where she focuses on criminal defense and family law, helping clients protect their freedom, their families, and their future. And in today's episode, we're going to demystify the First Amendment, which is an apropos topic given everything that's happening with respect to news. So, Kristina, first off, good to see you. And let's get into this, because what is the First Amendment as it pertains to freedom of speech?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having us on the program today. First of all, I would like to tell you the reasons why the First Amendment is so important, because First Amendment actually ties into criminal law, and this is actually our episode is going to tie into family law as well today. So it's pretty important for both elements of family law and criminal law. So with that being said, so the First Amendment is the right to express ideas and opinions without government censorship. And that could be nonverbal, and it also can be just verbal, but it also can be symbols as well. So the Supreme Court actually found that speech can extend beyond the spoken area, meaning speech. It can be nonverbal, verbal, symbols, and it also can be individuals' creativity. And we look at the Tinkerbell case. It's actually Tinker versus Des Moines. And it was a 1969 case. And if you recall, it was during Vietnam. They were wearing armbands, the students were. And the students wore these armbands to go to school. And obviously the school didn't want that. There was a lot of backlash on this. And the court ruled that the students don't shed their constitutional rights at the door. I mean, they don't shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech and or expression at the schoolhouse gates, and actually established that the school officials cannot suppress the students' expression unless it creates a substantial disruption or infringes on the rights of others. So that is a huge case, and that still plays a part today. And it also established the principle that students have the right to express themselves, even in controversial issues, as long as their actions are not disruptive in the school.
I'm telling you, the topic is so apropos given the campus protest that happened last year. So let me ask you the counter, which is, what are the not protected examples of free speech?
So everybody believes, and the reason, again, why I'm bringing this up to everyone is everyone says, hey, I have the freedom of speech. I have the freedom of speech. Well, that doesn't mean that's an absolute right. I mean, that is our Bill of Rights, and it was incorporated into the Constitution. However, I just want to make sure that people understand there are exceptions to that, and that's obscenity, threats and harassment, defamation. There's also restrictions on how you can do your speech, which means time, place, and manner. And we also have the incitement to violence as well.
Kristina, let me ask you, what, in terms of accessing material with respect to that portion, are there laws that require the verification of somebody being 18 or older to access material that may not be suitable to children when we think about freedom of speech in terms of that context?
But yes, there are. Recently, there was a case of Free Coalition versus Paxton. It was a 2025 case decided in June. And the author was Justice Clarence Thomas. And this law was subject to intermediate scrutiny, and because it was only an incidental effect on protected speech. And the reason why I cite this case is because recently I was trying to find a subject matter that was going to hit close to home. Now, most of the people know that I live in Livingston County. I have my practice in Ingham County, and I practice in different surrounding areas, the Tri-County area, Eaton County, Clinton County, Shiawassee, East Lansing, quite a bit. But one thing is, in Livingston County, there was this Facebook post, and we have a pastor named Mr. Bowden. He's also on the library board as well. And first of all, I'll say kudos to him for being on the library board, because he's doing a lot of stuff for the community. There's a lot of individuals out there that, they do things for the community and they don't get paid. And we should actually say thank you, because there's a lot of problems that they can face with that. And there's also a lot of time periods that they give up with their family. So first of all, we thank anybody who actually works in the community and does this volunteer work. But I want to bring this out today because he's trying to not ban some of the books in the library, what he's trying to do is there's a children's section in the library over there in Heartland in Livingston County. And my understanding is this, and I may have some facts incorrect, but I was looking at Facebook and there was a post on this and there was a protest on this. But what he was trying to do was take some of these books that were more of like the LGBTQ, transgender, and place those books over into the area of the adult section. And a lot of individuals in the community wanted this taken care of this way. And there's a lot of protesting going on this. And so I saw on Facebook the protesting was happening right in front of his church because he has a church right there in Livingston County. It's a big, huge church. And it's caused a lot of controversial issues on both sides of the fence. And I thought this would be a good issue to look at whether or not, one, are they going to be able to, is this free speech? Two, is it on private property or is it on governmental property? And so I thought we would delve into some of those situations today.
Kristina, you fed into the follow-up perfectly because I think a lot of the times people see these news stories and they go, well, how can I act, right? Because can I go out there and peacefully protest? What are my rights? So why don't you expand a little bit more, giving the book example, for instance, like what are the rights in that instance of folks from a legalities perspective to be able to peacefully protest maybe changes that are happening to the libraries in their communities?
Sure. So first of all, I would like to go back to the scenario that I was talking about. These individuals were actually protesting right outside the church. Now, Mr. Bowden does own some property that is a little ways, my understanding is, next to the church too as well. And, is anyone welcome in the church? Yeah, people are welcome in the church, but that is private property. Is that a governmental property? No, it's not. So do those people so let's say that they are actually on the property of the church. Do they have an absolute right to call the police, meaning the church? Do they get to call the police and ask them? They can call the police, absolutely. But they never, if they haven't asked them actually to leave the premises, that's not considered trespassing. So if they ask the individuals to leave the premises, if they were on the church property, then they would have to leave, or the police would be called and it would be considered trespassing. And I always tell individuals, if you want somebody to leave, I would always put it in written documentation, like a letter or something of that accord. Now, you could always contact the police to ask them to tell them that they're not to be on the property. And then the next time it would be a trespass. But it's always a good civil way of handling it in the community, just to send them a nice letter, a polite letter that says, this is government. This is not governmental property. This is private property. We always welcome you inside of our church if you'd like to worship with us. But, if you're picketing and things of that nature, this is private property. We ask that you not do this. And, if they don't abide by that simple request, then they could call the police and ask them to be charged with trespass. Then that's a criminal matter. As to the public-private property there's a side of the edge. If anyone goes by and drives down a road, they see the road, and then there's like an instep there, like a little egress there with the grass and things of that nature. That's usually governmentally owned, right? So if they're standing on that property and have 1 foot on the private property of the church, where do we go from there, right? And is that governmental property? Now, let's say that you're standing on the governmental property, this issue in and of itself. First of all, do they have a right to be there? And is this a good picketing way of handling it? Now, these individuals in the pictures, it looked like they had a blow-up penis. It was a big blow-up thing. And then they had some signs that looked like maybe, and some other, it wasn't a huge crowd, but it was enough that were on the side of the road. Now, is this going to interfere? The question is this going to interfere with the traffic coming down the road? Is this going to cause an accident? Those are things that we have to look at and the government looks at. And there's like a 3-pronged test that we look at.
So, Kristina, I think the natural question for me would be, so we see the banned books, right? And let's say I want to organize a protest, right? Do individuals have an absolute right to protest anywhere? And even in that scenario, and you can expand on that scenario, but what would be my options there if I did want to either protest at his church or somewhere adjacent to his church?
Great question, by the way. First answer to that question is this: no, you don't have an absolute right to go and protest anywhere, because if it's governmental property, you have to get permission. So it's time, place, and manner. Now, going back to this man who owns the church and the protesting, so they have actually, in the Facebook post, they were actually protesting on the side of the road, and they were kind of close near the church. So do they have that right to go and protest there? And that's a delicate issue, because you have to look at, is this going to be intruding upon the people driving back and forth on that road? It's a busy road. Is there going to be accidents? And is there a governmental interest here of the protection of the people? So if you're protecting the people and we feel like there's going to be accidents, then no, you don't have a right to go and actually go and protest there, because it's going to be dangerous, right? But as to the question that you had, there's time, place, and manner. And we have to look at, the government has to have, like, for instance, like, let's say we're going to the Capitol in Lansing, and we wanted to have a protest for, let's say, the 2A movement, which is the Second Amendment. They would actually have to contact the Capitol, find out if they can have the protest there, and the Capitol will give them a time and date and when they can go and have their protests, right? Or they could have, like, like they're talking about content that day and have a bunch of speakers. Same thing with, they could have another group, like they could have the transgender group come in, and they could have a speaking engagement at the Capitol too as well. And they'd give them a time, place, which would be at the Capitol, and that would be considered under the time, place, and manner. Now, let's say that the Capitol restricted, like said, no way, the transgender group cannot come in, then that would be against their freedom of speech, because they allowed the 2A group to come in, and they allowed all these other groups to come in, and they're focusing on what they're saying. So that is a freedom of speech issue right there. So what we do is we look at, is it content neutral for the time, place, and manner? So it's got to be content neutral, first of all. And then the second thing is the significant governmental interest. The government must have a valid, substantial interest for imposing a restriction. So, like, if they restricted an individual from coming to the Capitol just because it was, like, say, for instance, it was transgender issues, then that's a problem. That's infringing upon their freedom of speech, their First Amendment. Or same thing with 2A. If they didn't want the people talking about guns or the Second Amendment, and they restricted them but allowed all these other groups to come into the Capitol and talk, that's infringing on their First Amendment right too as well. So again, you can't, they cannot do that. The government cannot do that. So the government must have a valid, substantial interest in, like, imposing the restriction. Like, for instance, protecting privacy, public safety, preventing substantial disruptions. So that's where we get into, when I was talking about earlier about how they were on the side of the road for the church, and they're doing this protest. What is there going to be an issue with the government going and telling them that they can't go and have their protest there? I don't believe there will, in my opinion, because the fact is the government has a substantial interest to protect individuals, maybe little kids crossing there, maybe because it's a hectic road. It's going back and forth. There's a 2-way road. So if we're going to have some issues with maybe public safety, the governmental has a substantial interest right there. So that's protecting the people there.
I would love for you to expand on the roadways part of this, because we've seen a couple laws. I live in the state of Florida, for example, and we've seen a law pop up here with respect to protest and blockages of roadways. So can you kind of explain? So if I wanted to have a protest near the roadway or very near the roadway, that's okay because of the flow of traffic? Or just expand a little bit more of, like, what are the protected rights with respect to freedom of speech and protest with respect to roadways?
First of all, I would look at every township's laws, right? And if you're being content neutral, because you have to have it content neutral, the laws in the townships or the city. And if they're neutral and they say nobody can go and protest near the road, then you can't protest because nobody can. Now, if they say a certain group can and a certain group cannot, then that's actually going infringing on somebody else's First Amendment right. I believe that they have to actually look at the governmental protection of the people and if it's the safety of the individuals in of itself. Because one thing is the government is here to protect the people. All right. They're not here to infringe upon your rights, your First Amendment, your Second Amendment, or your constitutional rights. They're here to actually protect the people. Now, if that protection goes and overrides the freedom of speech, they have that right to do that. But again, we have to make sure, though, that we're not just saying that we're protecting the people and we're not being content neutral, too, as well. It has to be all across the board. No protest at all.
Well, Kristina, let me ask you to expand on that term, content neutral, because I hear that and I think, so does that mean it's subjective if the content is neutral? Can you kind of explain a little bit more what that phraseology means?
Sure, absolutely. In fact, I did pull a case up just recently, and it was talking about, the police department of Chicago versus Mosley, I believe it is, Mosley. It's a 1972 case, and it provides an example of a time, place, and manner regulation that failed the content neutrality requirement, and it prohibited all picketing within 150 feet of the school building and while classes were in session. But however, the picketing was allowed if the school was involved in a labor dispute. And the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot do that. In fact, it was Thurgood Marshall who observed that the ordinance describes picketing that's not in the terms of time, place, manner, but in terms of subject matter. So they were allowing the picketing to happen during school time if it was for a labor dispute, but nobody else could picket during school time. So see how that subject matter was important there with the Supreme Court?
I do get it now. So let me ask you, someone's listening to this, they're watching this, they go, hey, my freedom of speech was violated. What's the first thing that they should do? Should they contact you? Should they contact an attorney if they truly want to know what their rights are and if they're being infringed upon or not?
Well, they should contact us because it's always good to contact an attorney, first of all, to find out if their freedom of speech was violated. But you also want to make sure, too, that you find out what the ordinance says. Let's look at the ordinance first. I always look at the ordinance and see if it's about subject matter. And there's lots of different things about freedom of speech, too. What I'm concentrating today is on the time, place, and manner restriction, because I thought this was pretty fascinating due to the fact is I am a criminal defense attorney and also a family law attorney. And one, I thought, look, we're looking at trespassing, and that can be a criminal matter. I don't want anyone being charged for trespass, and I want to give them their, what they could face if that they were asked to leave. And so it could be private property that they're actually trespassing on. Or if the government goes and says that this is not where you can go and protest at because of the fact of the roads, and they haven't done that yet, according to Facebook posts, of course, I don't have any further, communication with anyone, but I'm sure I will after this podcast. But what I want to make sure, though, is that everybody knows their rights, and it's always best to look at your rights before you go and protest, because you might be doing it on private property. You might be protesting that on governmental property, which you have no right to do because of the time, place, and manner. And then you also need to look at, too, if the government is actually restricting you based upon subject matter. Because no matter what, if they allow one group, they cannot not disallow another group to have a different subject matter just because that's not an agreement to what you like. And so I want to make sure that everyone understands that, because not everything is a freedom of speech issue. And I don't want people getting like a trespass issue, or maybe getting a resisting obstructing because the police officer tells them to go, and they go and tell the police officer no, because they can get an RNO, which is a felony, and trespassing could be a misdemeanor. So they don't need anything on their record. So I wanted to make sure people were of the understanding. And if they need to know their rights a little bit more, they can contact my law firm, or they can contact another attorney that dwells in these kind of issues. But everything, constitutional rights have a high influence on criminal matters and also family law matters. And so that's why I think that every attorney, we took an oath to abide by the Constitution, not just the U.S. Constitution, but the state Constitution. And we need to make sure that we follow that Constitution, make sure that we talk about this to other individuals and let them be aware of the situation and let them know what is happening in the community so that they don't get charged maybe for criminal matter or anything of that nature. But as to the family law issue is that we just had this recent case that came out that said that they're talking about age restrictions, and it was like on a rated R material. And so they put an age restriction on there, like I talked about previously, and they said that that was fine. So going back to the library, in my opinion, you can go ahead and have that age restriction and place those books, because you're not banning and you're not censoring those books. You're just placing them in a different aisle with the adult books. That's all you're doing. So I get it that maybe people are not pleased with that, but they can do that, in my opinion, because it's the child's age group, and they're not violating the protection, freedom of speech protection.
Well, Kristina, thank you for the time and insights on this. I think our audience is truly appreciative.
Thank you. It was actually a fun subject matter.
And thank you for everybody listening to and watching this episode out there of Legal Beagle. If you want to schedule a consultation with Kristina and the team, visit LykeLaw, LYKELAW law.com to schedule that consultation. Be sure to like and review. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.